For years, Catherine had refused to speak publicly about the possessions Diana left behind, even when royal ceremonies placed those memories in uncomfortable hands. But when Queen Camilla entered a private memorial reception wearing Diana's treasured sapphire-and-pearl bracelet, Catherine's silence finally ended. Her response was calm, brief, and devastating, because beneath its carefully chosen words was a boundary the palace could no longer pretend did not exist. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine saw the bracelet. She was greeting guests at Clarence House, the London residence used by the King and Queen, when the blue stones caught her attention. The reception honored women connected to Diana's charitable legacy, making the choice personal. This was not a jewel from the Crown Collection, the official group of royal items held for the monarchy. It was a private possession, preserved because it belonged to Diana's life beyond ceremony. William followed her gaze and understood. Catherine tightened one hand around her evening bag, leaned toward him, and quietly asked whether he had approved its removal from storage. The prince answered with one word: no. He did not challenge Camilla before the guests, yet the silence carried its own accusation. He stopped speaking unless duty demanded it, while Catherine remained beside him, absorbing the shock he could not safely show. The bracelet had not appeared publicly since Diana's death. Palace records linked it to letters she wrote to William during his childhood, giving the piece a meaning no valuation could measure. Camilla, however, moved through the reception as though the choice had already been accepted. She believed the gesture honored continuity. Catherine saw something else, a mother's memory being used without her son's consent. Hours later, Catherine made her decision. Through a documented statement approved inside Kensington Palace, she declared, "Some possessions carry a memory no title can inherit. They must be treated with care, consent, and respect." The message never named Camilla, but no one inside the royal household misunderstood it. A communications aide read the words twice before pressing send, aware this was more than sadness. Catherine had challenged the moral authority behind the Queen Consort's choice. Before sunrise, Camilla demanded to know who had allowed the statement to leave without wider palace approval. The answer struck harder than the message itself. William had reviewed every sentence and personally authorized its release. But the bracelet was never simply a piece of jewelry, and to understand why Catherine's words cut so deeply, the palace had to confront what Diana had entrusted to her sons, and what Camilla believed she had finally earned. Behind the public statement stood three women, separated by time, but bound to the same unresolved history. Diana had worn the bracelet during moments of private vulnerability. Camilla saw it as proof that the monarchy had finally accepted her place. Catherine viewed it differently, as a memory belonging to two sons who had already watched too much of their mother's identity become royal property. What appeared to be a dispute over jewelry was actually a battle over grief. Diana had received the bracelet privately during the final years of her marriage, when affection had become rare, and public duty often concealed private pain. It was never a ceremonial jewel, never designed to represent the crown, and never meant to carry the weight of royal authority. She wore it while visiting hospitals, writing personal letters, and spending quiet time with William and Harry. Its value came from memory, not status, and that difference mattered. After her death, the bracelet was catalogued among her private effects. William later asked that it remain unworn until both brothers agreed on its future. The request was not a legal command, but a family boundary, simple and deeply personal. Catherine understood that boundary because William had once shown her a childhood photograph of Diana wearing the piece while holding his hand. He had not called it priceless. He had said it was one of the few objects that still felt connected to her voice. Camilla experienced Catherine's statement as something entirely different. Alone after the reception, she removed the bracelet and placed it on a table with deliberate care. Anger followed humiliation. She had believed wearing it would signal reconciliation, proof that the monarchy had finally accepted her place beside Charles. Instead, one calm sentence had transformed that gesture into a national accusation. Charles knew his wife intended to wear something linked to Diana, but he had been told the item came from the formal royal collection, the official group of historic jewels held for the monarchy rather than one person. He understood the truth only when William called late that night. The prince did not raise his voice. That made the message sharper. He told his father the issue was not Camilla's title, marriage, or place within the family. The betrayal was simpler. Neither he nor Harry had been consulted before their mother's private possession was removed from secured storage. Catherine's decision had not begun at the reception. Months earlier, she had discovered that Diana's belongings were being quietly reclassified, and from that moment, her silence had started to feel dangerous. That earlier discovery had remained hidden behind closed doors, but it would become the point of no return. The moment Catherine realized that silence was no longer protecting Diana's memory. Months before the bracelet appeared at Clarence House, Catherine had walked into a private royal exhibition, expecting to review a harmless historical display. Instead, she saw Diana's handwritten notes, personal photographs, and jewelry arranged beneath a new label, property associated with the Queen's household. Catherine said nothing publicly that day. But according to those present, she stood before the cabinet long after everyone else had moved on, and left with a question the palace could not answer. Palace archivists had prepared the exhibition around royal women and public service, and Catherine had been invited because several objects reflected Diana's early years' work and hospital visits. The display was private, intended for trustees, historians, and senior family members before selected pieces entered a reorganized Royal Heritage Collection, a formal archive preserving objects linked to the monarchy's history. Nothing about the invitation suggested conflict. Catherine expected careful history, measured language, and respect for the woman whose work shaped so much of her own public duty. Instead, the calm order of the display concealed a decision already moving through the palace. One small card changed everything. Catherine stopped when she saw the sapphire-and-pearl bracelet beneath wording that described it as available for future use by the Queen or Princess of Wales. She asked who had approved the phrase. An archivist hesitated, then explained that the reclassification followed a verbal instruction from Camilla's household. The answer struck hard. The archivist watched her expression change and repeated that no signed approval had been attached. Catherine's voice lowered, but the emotion did not. She insisted that William must be told before a single item was moved. William met her later in a private corridor, where she described the display as something more troubling than poor judgment. Diana's personal history, she said, was being redistributed as though her son's grief carried no authority. The prince listened without interruption, opened the exhibition folder, then closed it with finality. Then nothing moves. He followed those words with a written instruction, freezing the transfer of Diana's private effects. The order should have ended the matter. Instead, palace officials later processed the bracelet through a separate household inventory, a secondary record used for temporary loans, allowing the piece to bypass the restriction through a technical distinction. Catherine understood the deception only when Camilla wore that same bracelet at Clarence House. The promise had been broken. The boundary had been ignored. And silence, once mistaken for dignity, now felt dangerously close to surrender. The next morning, Catherine would not hide behind statements or advisors. She would enter the room where Camilla was waiting, and force the royal family to speak plainly about Diana for the first time in years. There were no cameras, no secretaries seated between them, and no public ceremony to soften the moment. Catherine entered the small morning room at Clarence House, carrying only a thin inventory file. Camilla was already waiting beside the fireplace, the bracelet locked away upstairs. What followed was not a shouting match. It was something far more dangerous inside a royal family. A controlled conversation in which every quiet sentence exposed years of resentment. Camilla had requested the meeting after Catherine's statement took over the morning headlines. Charles offered to attend, perhaps hoping his presence might prevent the discussion from becoming personal, but both women refused the protection. The Queen Consort wanted answers without her husband speaking for her. Catherine wanted the truth without the king softening it. She opened the file and placed down records showing that Diana's bracelet had been classified as a private possession, not an item belonging automatically to the reigning household. Camilla's restraint broke first. She accused Catherine of allowing the country to see her as a thief who had taken something from a dead woman. Catherine did not retreat. She said the statement had never challenged Camilla's legal position, title, or marriage. It challenged the decision to wear a mother's private possession without asking either of her sons. Camilla insisted she had worn the bracelet to honor Diana and represent continuity between past and present. She believed the gesture might finally prove that remembrance and acceptance could exist together. Catherine listened, then answered with a sentence that changed the temperature of the room. Continuity without consent can feel like erasure. Camilla turned away. For several seconds, she said nothing. Catherine then revealed what had been withheld. Months earlier, William had frozen every transfer involving Diana's private effects. His written instruction meant nothing could be moved, loaned, or worn until he had been consulted. Camilla stared at the document and insisted she had never seen it. She had believed the bracelet came through established channels, meaning the approved palace process used to track and authorize royal possessions. Then came the admission neither woman expected to make public. A senior household official had encouraged Camilla to wear the piece, telling her it would display confidence and end comparisons with Diana once and for all. The choice had not been purely emotional, it had been strategic. Catherine closed the file, left it on the table, and said the family now had to discover who approved the loan and who kept William's restriction from reaching the Queen. The confrontation had exposed the emotion, but the true battle now moved into the machinery of the monarchy, where signatures, inventories, and household authority would decide whether Catherine's boundary had any force. By midday, the dispute had moved beyond personal grief. A locked inventory, a missing instruction, and one carefully worded loan form now stood between the palace and a full institutional crisis. William entered the king's private office, expecting confusion. Instead, he found evidence that someone had knowingly separated Diana's bracelet from the rest of her protected effects. The emotional wound was becoming a question of power, and the answer threatened more than Camilla's reputation. The keeper of the royal collection called the closed review within hours. That title belongs to the official responsible for safeguarding, recording, and managing historic royal objects. William sat across from Charles, with Princess Anne beside him, while a senior archivist and representatives from both households opened the disputed records. No one raised their voice. They did not need to. Every page carried the possibility that palace procedure had been deliberately twisted. The archivist confirmed that Diana's bracelet remained inside a private family archive. It could be displayed for historical purposes, but wearing it publicly required consultation with the beneficiaries named in the original inventory. Those beneficiaries were her sons. That single fact stripped away the comforting language of misunderstanding. Someone had known permission was required. Charles read William's earlier restriction and slowly set it down. The king said nothing, but his expression changed when the records showed that the order had reached the palace and stopped before Camilla's wardrobe office. His son watched him carefully, waiting for anger, denial, anything. Silence came instead. William struggled as officials argued over codes, classifications, and temporary transfers. The prince finally interrupted. He told them to stop speaking about his mother as though she were merely a category of royal property. Diana had been a person. She had been their mother. No technical phrase could erase that truth. Anne supported him immediately. The princess said tradition could guide the monarchy, but it could not be used to overrule personal grief. Her words shifted the room because she rarely challenged established procedure through emotion. Yet this time, she refused to let protocol become an excuse. Then the final authorization appeared. Camilla's senior private secretary had used a temporary exhibition code to release the bracelet, avoiding the consultation requirement entirely. When questioned, the official admitted he understood the code would bypass William's restriction. He defended himself with one sentence. He had acted, he said, after receiving verbal encouragement from someone at the highest level. Every person in the room turned toward Charles. Charles now had to decide whether to protect the institution, defend his wife, or admit that his own desire to create harmony had opened the door to a decision that wounded his eldest son. The king had spent years trying to convince the country that the past could be respected without controlling the future. Now Diana's bracelet sat at the center of his family, proving how fragile that promise had always been. Charles could have dismissed the dispute as an administrative mistake. Instead, he issued a decision that stunned Camilla, relieved William, and quietly divided the palace. Because for the first time, he acknowledged that reconciliation had been pursued without permission. Charles confirmed that he had encouraged palace staff to find respectful ways of bringing Diana's legacy into the present monarchy. He wanted continuity, not conflict. Yet the monarch denied authorizing the bracelet itself, insisting that no one had asked him to approve its removal from the private archive. His distinction mattered because the archive held personal possessions, not ordinary royal assets, and those items carried rights belonging to Diana's sons. The king then ordered an immediate suspension of every loan connected to her private effects. William and Harry would receive a complete inventory, and no object could move again until both approved new handling rules. The decision was firm. It was also deeply personal. Camilla received the order in her private study. She read the final paragraph, removed her glasses, and asked her secretary to leave. The door closed. Silence followed. The queen consort felt abandoned. To her, the ruling did more than correct a mistake. It appeared to confirm Catherine's public rebuke and place Diana's memory above the authority of her crown. Years of loyalty, patience, and public service seemed to collapse beneath one bracelet. Charles visited her later. He admitted that he should have understood how deeply the decision would wound William, whose grief had never belonged to palace strategy. Camilla answered with restrained anger. She told him that Catherine had been allowed to define her intentions before the country, while she had been left to carry the shame. The senior private secretary soon accepted responsibility and stepped aside pending review, a formal inquiry into whether palace rules had been misused. Before leaving, however, he privately told Camilla that several senior figures had supported the plan. They wanted to normalize her access to historically sensitive jewels and end the constant divide between her position and Diana's memory. That revelation offered no comfort. It only proved the act had been deliberate. While Charles and Camilla retreated into silence, William asked Catherine to meet him without aids. He had realized her statement was not only about Diana, it was about the kind of royal woman Catherine was being asked to become. Away from household politics and royal titles, William and Catherine would finally confront what her intervention had cost, and why remaining silent would have cost them even more. That evening, William and Catherine sat together without advisors, files, or prepared language. The palace expected them to discuss public strategy. Instead, William spoke about the last time he remembered his mother wearing the bracelet and why he had avoided looking at it for years. Catherine had defended a boundary he struggled to explain himself. In that private conversation, the controversy stopped being about Camilla and became a moment of release for Diana's eldest son. William had chosen a small family sitting room at Windsor, far from the offices where every sentence could become policy. Their phones remained outside. No secretary waited nearby, and no formal minutes recorded what followed. The prince carried only a childhood photograph. In it, Diana wore the sapphire-and-pearl bracelet during an informal afternoon with her sons. She was holding his hand. He placed the picture between them and admitted that the bracelet's value had never come from sapphires or pearls. It came from memory. He remembered his mother's voice, the pressure of her fingers, and the rare feeling that the world beyond the family could not reach them. That was why he had avoided seeing the piece for years. Looking at it meant opening a grief he had learned to carry without speaking. Catherine listened as William confessed the fear behind his silence. He worried that objecting publicly would make him appear trapped in the past or hostile toward his father's wife. Yet every year he remained quiet. Others treated that restraint as permission. The prince now understood that silence had not protected anyone. It had merely allowed the boundary to disappear. Catherine answered with her own admission. Releasing the statement had frightened her. She knew it could be read as a challenge to Camilla, Charles, and the palace hierarchy she had spent years respecting. Still, she could not watch Diana's private pain become public symbolism again. William said his mother had suffered whenever personal wounds were reshaped into royal performance. Catherine's intervention, he believed, had finally separated remembrance from display. Together, they drafted a new family protocol, a clear set of rules governing Diana's private possessions. Her sons would hold joint stewardship, meaning both would share responsibility for protecting and approving their use. Catherine and Harry's children would also be included in future decisions about exhibitions or public display. William warned that the reaction would be enormous. This time, however, the palace would not soften Catherine's words or reduce the crisis to a misunderstanding. By morning, the private boundary established between husband and wife would become a national conversation, captured in one front page that transformed Catherine's quiet sentence into a verdict on the monarchy's past. The country did not respond to the value of the bracelet. It responded to the pain attached to it. Newspapers, broadcasters, historians, and crowds outside royal residences interpreted Catherine's statement as something larger than a family disagreement. It was seen as a defense of memory against rank, and of consent against tradition. Then one newspaper published a single image beside 7 words, and the emotional meaning of the story became impossible for the palace to control. Broadcasters opened their morning coverage with Catherine's exact statement, and returned repeatedly to its unusual directness. Royal messages were normally softened by layers of approval, but this one carried a clear moral boundary. William had reviewed it before release, and that detail changed everything. The future king was not merely supporting his wife, he was confirming that the wound belonged to him too. Palace officials answered with a restrained notice. Diana's personal possessions were under formal review, and the bracelet had been returned to secured family storage. The announcement sounded calm, but its meaning was severe. Secured storage meant the piece could no longer move through ordinary household channels, while its ownership and future use were being examined. One national newspaper captured the public mood with brutal simplicity. Its split front page placed Diana wearing the bracelet while holding young William's hand beside a recent photograph of Catherine arriving at Windsor. Across both images appeared 7 words: "A memory is not a crown." The headline spread faster than any official explanation. Visitors gathered outside Kensington Palace, the London residence long associated with Diana, and now used by members of her family. White roses appeared near the gates. One woman held a handwritten sign declaring, "Thank you for protecting what love left behind." Her message turned a royal dispute into something painfully human. The public was not defending jewels, it was defending the right to grieve without that grief being borrowed. Camilla watched the coverage alone. She understood that an immediate defense would deepen the backlash and make her appear more concerned with reputation than remorse. For the first time, the Queen Consort accepted that good intentions could not erase the emotional meaning attached to an object. Charles then authorized the new stewardship protocol, a formal set of rules placing Diana's private effects under the approval of her sons and their chosen family representatives. No royal could wear them without consent. Before the announcement was finalized, Camilla requested a private meeting with Catherine. She did not ask to reverse the ruling. She asked to return the bracelet herself. The final meeting would not erase the hurt, but it would decide whether the bracelet remained a weapon between 2 women, or became the boundary that finally ended years of royal avoidance. There was no ceremony when the bracelet was returned, no photographers stood nearby, and no palace statement announced the meeting. Camilla carried the small velvet case herself and placed it between Catherine and William. What followed was not forgiveness in the simple sense, nor a sudden rewriting of history. It was an acknowledgement that some memories cannot be inherited through marriage, ceremony, or crown, and that respect begins where entitlement finally ends. Camilla met them privately at Windsor, while Charles remained away by deliberate choice. The king knew his presence could turn a personal reckoning into another struggle over loyalty, so he allowed the 3 people most wounded by the decision to speak without intervention. The Queen Consort placed the case down and admitted, through that private conversation, that she had worn the bracelet believing it would symbolize acceptance and continuity. Her voice carried no defense now. She understood that the gesture had placed her need for legitimacy above the grief attached to Diana's possession. Catherine did not humiliate her, demand witnesses, or force a public apology. She said the issue had never been about denying Camilla her place. It was about refusing to let Diana's identity become a tool for strengthening anyone else's position. William accepted the velvet case. The prince told her that the family could move forward only when silence was no longer mistaken for permission. Camilla agreed. She did not challenge the new rules, and she did not ask for the bracelet to be displayed again. The case returned to Diana's family archive under the stewardship protocol, the new set of rules placing her private possessions under the joint care of her sons. Nothing could be worn or publicly displayed unless William and Harry approved it together. That decision separated personal memory from ordinary royal property and turned emotional consent into a formal requirement rather than a private courtesy. Catherine's statement had changed more than one dispute. It established her not as a rival using Diana's memory, but as the family member willing to protect its human meaning. Camilla's return did not erase the mistake. It did something more important. It stopped the mistake from becoming permanent. And so the bracelet returned to silence. But it was no longer the silence of avoidance. It was the protected quiet of a memory finally placed beyond ambition, beyond comparison, and beyond the reach of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.